Hello, this is Emlyn and Jada with another episode of Stories Behind the Scrubs. On this podcast, we interview medical professionals in order to get a better idea of what it is they do and why they do it. We also listen as they tell us their story, recounting how they chose to go into medicine. On today's episode of Stories Behind the Scrubs, we're going to be talking to Corey Callihan, a paramedic in the Montgomery County Hospital District who's also involved in SWAT services and community-based Stop the Bleed trainings. A quick warning before we get started. In this episode, we'll be discussing the graphic realities of what first responders see and the mental health struggles that sometimes accompany it, so please take care when you're listening to the show. Okay, let's get to the good stuff.
Hey.
Hi. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. Just trying to wrangle up kids all day. So if you hear some screaming babies in the back.
Yeah, it's fine. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
So we just wanted to kind of start off asking about where you went to high school and what you were interested at the time, if it was medicine related or not.
Yeah. So I went to Tomball High School. I graduated now like 12 years ago. And at the time in high school, no, I did not even think I would do medicine. Honestly, I had no idea what I wanted to do. My career path had changed so many times. I thought I was going to do the military then at one point. I thought I was going to be like a preacher at one point. I thought I was going to do chemistry. I mean, I was all over the road. But I guess kind of how I got started was my junior year of high school. One of my friends was like a volunteer firefighter or something, and so he was always wearing, his like volunteer firefighter shirt or whatever everywhere he went, and he would talk about all the cool things he got to go do, and so I was like, man, I want to go try that. That seems like fun. And so I went and I volunteered at a small department called Rose Hill Fire Department. And I'm sure you probably don't know where Rose Hill Fire Department's at or where Rose Hill is. Well, you'd be in the same boat as about 99% of America. Rose Hill is like a small little dot on the map. It's in between like Cy-Fair and Tomball. And all they have out there is like 2 roads, a Dollar General, and a bunch of grass. So with that, they have a lot of time to do extra training and stuff. So I'd go there and we would do some fire training. They get a lot of grass fires too. And so, but with that, since we had a lot of downtime, we did have a lot of, what we call family time. You hang out at the table, you play, card games, board games, whatever. And I fell in love with that environment, like the brotherhood behind it. And so I started to ask, like, okay, well, hey, I'm about to be 18. Like, what do I need to actually do to actually work here, and get a check? And so they're like, hey, well, first thing you need to do is you need to go to fire school. And fire school, then you need to go to EMT school. So I was like, okay. So I went to TEEX and I got my fire certs. And I had also gone to TEEX to get my EMT cert. And TEEX is it's not a college, obviously. TEEX is it's a vocation center, right? So they do a lot of different certifications for many things. So they're very famous for their fire school, and they also have a really prominent police academy. They're out in College Station right next to A&M, and they have this massive city. They call it Disaster City, and it's just like crash buildings. They have like big pipeline areas. They got like airplanes. Like when you graduate fire academy, they like light the airplanes on fire, and you put the airplanes out for your family to watch. They've got train wrecks. I mean, the city is insane. And so I was like, okay, I did their fire academy, and it was really great. And so I was like, no way their EMT stuff it's gonna be bad. And so I went to their EMT school. I did that. Uh, I did a fast track course. So from zero to getting my EMT was 5 weeks long, which is pretty fast looking back at it. And during my clinical times, I hated it. I didn't think that I would continue with medicine at all, just because of um, how much I didn't like it. You know, just because the reason why I didn't like it was, growing up, you hear that, when people call 911, it's life and death. And so whenever I was doing clinicals and write-outs, I quickly found out, right, that that's definitely not the case. People call 911 for many things, and it just wasn't initially what I thought it would be. And as an EMT level, I felt like I wasn't able to do a lot, and so it just wasn't what I initially thought it would be. But I ended up getting my EMT, and so then I'm still trying to chase my dream of being a firefighter. And so with that, you have to take a lot of different tests to get into the fire department, and a lot of it is point based. So if you wanted a job at a very, reputable department, you had to have obviously a lot of number of points, and there's candidates that are testing for the same job, all over the country. So it's very competitive. And I found out that most people that were testing for the job and were getting them were paramedic or were, veterans and things like that who were getting these extra points. And so to get this better job, I said, I'll go back into medicine and I'll go get my paramedic, and maybe that'll be better. And I actually ended up falling in love with it there, and actually never went back to the fire department. But being a paramedic was a lot better for sure.
Yeah. So it sounds like you, shortly after you were in that disaster city getting your fire certification, you thought to yourself, like, how could EMT certification beat this? Was that certification, was that like one step on the path of becoming a firefighter, or was that certification different, like your own interest?
No, so it was on the path to become a firefighter.
Okay.
Before, a long time ago, I say a long time ago, in the early, I guess, start of the fire departments, right, all they did was they fought fire. If it was a medical call or anything else, that was EMS's problem. Fire and EMS were very separate. But as time progressed, they started sort of blending in together. So now a lot of times if you call 911, most people don't realize it, but the fire departments come with us also. And that's for, if we need the extra manpower on helping them, get out of, the house and help move them to the stretcher or the ambulance. Or maybe the call isn't what we think it is. Sometimes people may call because they see somebody fall, but really it's because they fell because they went into cardiac arrest, and so we need those extra hands on deck so that we can provide, the best patient care to these people. And so with that, right, having the more help obviously is in turn better for us as medical providers, as well as, for the civilians and stuff like that we protect. And the other thing too is that we're also teaching fire departments some basic medical interventions as well. In Montgomery County, we teach our fire departments how to place an advanced airway. So that helps us out with people that are in cardiac arrest, helps us get that standard of care a lot faster. The other thing that we help teach our fire departments now is to give epi, just like for if someone is having an allergic reaction, so we can get that medicine on board faster to help them out. So the fire department now is kind of blending in more medical. And so all of that ties into the fact that whenever I was trying to do the fire department, they were pushing everybody now to go to have their EMT. And so to become a fire department member, I had to go get my EMT certification. So that's why I went that route.
Got it. I didn't know that there was almost like a process or transition from it just being firefighting alone to being firefighting and medical services. A lot of the earlier experiences you described, whether starting at that volunteer fire department, or not volunteer fire department, but beginning to volunteer there and having that interest in fire, and it sounds like you enjoyed your certification. Do you remember either the key moment or a couple of the experiences that really, like, I guess, catalyzed your love for being a paramedic? Like, what changed that course for you?
Um, so what made me fall in love with being a paramedic was at an EMT level, it's very like you see this, you do this, A, plus B always equals C kind of thing. And I felt like there was really no way to uh, almost like deviate or create your own uh, art, I guess, in that job. But as a paramedic, you are given uh, obviously a whole lot more tools, but it's also a thinking man's game, and I think that is what made me fall in love with it. For instance, if I have somebody who's really hurting, maybe they broke their leg or they got burned or something, and I can only give them a certain amount of a pain medication, due to whatever circumstance. Let's say maybe their blood pressure is a little low, and I can't give them any more because I'm afraid it'll lower their blood pressure. Well, how can I make this 100 mics of fentanyl feel like more? So in paramedic school, right, you learn that we have medications, one of them being promethazine. It's an anti-nausea medicine. But another thing that it does is that it potentiates the effects of narcotics. So with that, right, it may make that 100 fentanyl maybe feel like 150 or 200, right? So it can help go a little bit longer. So we can give him that. Also, there's a benefit that it will help, reduce the nausea effects so that he doesn't, or that they don't feel nauseous and throw up. So creating aspects in like that, or really problem solving, if I have a sick patient, their heart rate is really high and their blood pressure is really low, trying to figure out exactly, what was this cause, because when you're giving a patient, you always have to be thinking, so many steps ahead, right? Is their heart rate really fast because this is a cardiac problem? Or is their heart rate really fast because they're compensating, they're in, septic shock, or, whatever the case may be. And I really enjoyed that aspect. That, and also being able to see the fruits of your labor, right? Being able to have somebody who can't breathe and to be able to give them medicine and to, perform these critical interventions and actually like see like what you're doing making a difference in somebody's life is is obviously a big reward. And it's not something you get to do all the time. I mean, I would say, for probably, 85% of the time someone calls 911, they're relatively minor, right? But that other 15% or so are people who truly do need 911 or an ambulance, and being able to kind of make a difference in that regard is, it makes it worth it for sure.
Yeah, problem solving is definitely something that I've seen a lot of when we're out in the field and working with a lot of the patients.
Yeah.
But when I first met you, you were teaching us the bleeding control.
Yes.
Like during our internship training.
Mm-hmm.
And when you walked in, you kind of introduced yourself by talking about a few of the different, I guess, groups that you are part of throughout your career. And I feel like I remember you mentioning like Army, paramedics, SWAT, and possibly FBI, but I wasn't really sure. I was a little confused. But can you just kind of clarify like what you were part of?
Yeah. So I'm a combat medic for the Army. I also am a SWAT medic. So I am on the Montgomery County SWAT team. I obviously provide medical coverage for their team. But one thing that I helped kind of establish with MCHD is our Tech Ops program. And so in that, there's me and a handful of other guys. And what we do is we provide medical coverage for numerous groups. So if there is, anybody who's going to serve a high risk warrant, right? Or if they are going to, be in potentially a hostile environment, or whatever special circumstance, I have a select few of guys who are trained to perform, medical interventions in a hostile environment, as well as, these guys have specialized training with these departments that we work with. So we kind of perform coverage almost in the general region. We will also go outside of Montgomery County. But with that, right, I mean, we work a lot with Montgomery County SWAT, Conroe SWAT. We've done a lot with the Conroe ISD, their special response team. So with that, right, those are school police officers, but the police officers, they have a special team that is designed obviously for active shooters, any sort of hostage event that would potentially happen in a school. We've also performed medical coverage for FBI, DEA, ATF, all sorts of different groups of people. So if they know that they're going into if they're going to perform a warrant, or if there's an active situation, maybe somebody took somebody hostage in a building, or if someone has barricaded themselves, they will call me, or they'll call another guy in our little program, and we'll provide those resources to them. We've been doing that probably the last 9 years, and I've been a part of the team itself, or the SWAT team officially, for the last 7 years.
That's incredible. I had no idea that there was such a network involved with being a paramedic. I mean, I'm sure people can just stick to their like hospital system or that smaller care system, but it sounds like it has much broader, much wider applications that you have covered.
Oh yeah.
I was wondering if you could like maybe discuss what kind of specialized training was involved when you decided to join that SWAT team. Did you have to do any extra? Because it sounds like not only was it perhaps a patient's life in danger, but your own life in danger, depending on the situation.
Right. Yeah, I've done a lot. I guess before I'll go into that, yeah, I mean, being a paramedic, opens you up to so many different platforms to perform medicine. I mean, there's medical coverage on, like offshore rigs for oil and gas, right? These people that live on these barges or whatever, I don't know what they live on, right? But they need medical coverage as well. And so a lot of times companies will hire paramedics. I had also looked into doing some contracting. People were offering contracts to go to Antarctica, be a medic in Antarctica. Obviously, you can do military contracting overseas as a civilian paramedic, or you can be, paramedics at, special events such as rodeos, concerts, whatever, or obviously, working in a hospital system. But anywhere you're going to go, we're going to have a mass gathering of people, whether it be for work or an event or anything, you're going to have some sort of medical coverage for everybody. So having that paramedic background really opens the door to a lot of different avenues in which you can work in. But how I got into mine, or how I got into the tactical environment in general, was a really big passion of mine, and it's still probably my biggest passion today. But it started out with the fact that we were doing training, just teaching, regular training to our company, and there was an officer that worked at the hospital, and I would see him all the time, dropping patients off, and he had asked us, hey, would you guys be able to come in and teach my guys refresher on how to put a tourniquet on? And I was like, of course. So we went and we taught them how to do tourniquets. Eventually that led to them going, hey, later on we're going to do a warrant. The address is going to be over here. Do you guys mind staging close by, just in case something were to happen? We have you there. So we said, for sure. So we went and we staged with them afterwards. After the warrant was over with or whatever, they came by and they thanked us for us being out there. We're like, of course, anything you guys ever need, let me know. Like, I don't mind doing this. This was, something different, right? Different than my day-to-day job of, doing what I always do. So I enjoy the difference. So they're like, of course. And so with that, right, relationship kept building. They kept asking for more trainings, or, hey, will you come stand by at one of our trainings just in case one of our guys get hurt? And so with that, I, kept volunteering and standing up like, hey, I want to do this job. And so with that, they're like, hey, we're going to go do some medical training. Would you like to come with us? And so the first thing that we went to go do, first medical training that I got to do with these guys was a course called, they don't do it anymore, but it was called ATURC. And what it stands for was Advanced Integrated Response Tactics. This was a course provided by a company called Alert. Alert stands for Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training. It's currently it's a federally funded program, through FEMA, and they focus on having a standardized approach to an active shooter response. Specifically like, with school shootings, obviously there's a mass problem with that. And so this is the government's response to help have some standardized trainings from all departments all across the U.S. that if an event is happening, everybody can be on the same page. Because in these scenarios, communication is paramount. It started off with a group of guys right after Columbine in San Marcos that noticed the problem. They're like, well, here's how we're going to fix that for our county. Once these guys developed their program, they started teaching it to, San Marcos cops, and they slowly started to expand. With that, the federal government caught wind of what they were doing. They loved it. And now they're a fully, funded program, and they go all around the U.S. teaching these sorts of trainings, and these group of guys, they have different courses and different levels that they go through. They kind of break it down into three different levels. First one, level 1, what they call it, is primarily for officers. And what that has to do is, as soon as the call comes out that there's an event, how does the first responding officer go into this scenario? How do they handle the situation? And what do they do when the situation is handled, right? Whether the shooter gives up or they place him in custody. What do you do from the beginning to that point? And then level 2 has to do with, well, now that we have the shooter or whatever the case is, the threat handled, and what do we do with all these patients? So level 2 talks about how do we treat these people? How do we get other resources to the scene so that we can provide, more efficient medical care? And then level 3 is about how do we get these patients out, as well as how do we start building our command structure so that we can have more organization, so that we can, be more efficient in managing this scene altogether. So I started taking those classes with them. Once I started taking those classes, getting a little bit more knowledge on just some basic tactics, as well as just basic, I guess for a lack of a better word, combat battlefield type medicine, and just kind of shifting my scope from civilian EMS to more of a tactical military type style. That's kind of where that all began. And after kind of serving on their team, it's just as a helper, they gave me, Montgomery County gave me the opportunity to test for their team. And their test is it's a really rigorous test. You go out for, a couple days out in the woods, and you're awake the whole time, and they work you like crazy. You do a bunch of PT, and you do a lot of running, and then when you think you're done running, you run some more, and then you're performing different skills, land navigation, you're performing rescues, you are trying to make these split-second decisions for the benefit of the team. And if you are able to make it through their assessment, then you go back later on and you do a panel interview. And if you pass the panel interview and the assessment, they will extend you an invitation to be on their team. I did that. We had started out with a group of, I think, 25 of us. And then within the first 3 hours, there was 4 left. So it's not for the faint of heart, I'll tell you that. But it was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done, for sure. Harder than any of the military training I've ever done, harder than all the school.
Yeah, the training definitely sounds very intense.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I did notice that you talked a lot about, how you got into teaching, and especially focusing on, mass shootings or school shootings. And that kind of that took me back to when you were teaching us bleeding control and teaching us how to use the tourniquet for the first time. I just remember we had played with them a little bit the day before, but she didn't really make us put them on, and it wasn't really that big of a deal. And then you came in and listed all the groups you've been a part of, and I was like, oh man, I have a feeling this is not going to be so easy. And sure enough, you came around and checked all of us. And was like, no, it needs to be tighter, it needs to be tighter. But you were telling us some of the experiences of when you've used a tourniquet, not just for work, but even outside of work. And I think it's kind of important just to share with the listeners how important the tourniquet is, and when you think the most important time to have it is, and kind of what the benefit of using a tourniquet is.
Oh, for sure. So like when I was going through EMT school and paramedic school, back then, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was obviously ongoing, but it was still kind of in the early stages, maybe almost in the middle. But when I was in school, people would say, hey, if you're putting a tourniquet on, this is our last ditch effort. If you're putting a tourniquet on, you can call that limb goodbye. You might as well say, they're not going to ever have that limb. So a lot of times tourniquets were put down at the very bottom of your bag. You wouldn't even know if you even had a tourniquet. It didn't really matter. It was a tool that we had that was very, frowned upon to use. But obviously, where we get a lot of our trauma research and education, it obviously comes from the military background, right? What is the current war? What tools are they using? What is their research like? And the answers that they get from that trickle down into obviously the civilian side, because it doesn't matter if you get shot in Houston, Texas, or if you get shot in Afghanistan, right? A bullet hole is still a bullet hole, right? My body's going to bleed the exact same as it does in Afghanistan as it does down here in Houston. So what are they doing is that it's working? What can we take from them so that we can provide better care for us here on the state side? And obviously through a lot of research that they were learning that, these tourniquets that we, had forgotten about and that we were putting on the back burner were actually saving, a lot of lives. And there is, numerous research, that backs that up. There is special committees, there's, obviously the most, influential one is they call it the COTC, the Committee of Tactical Casualty Combat Care. It's a board of doctors who take all this evidence and all this research that is going on battlefield medicine, something that is tried, true, and tested, and they're figuring out what is working for these patients and what is not. And obviously with that, tourniquets were huge. Bleeding out is the most preventable cause of death on the battlefield. That's kind of the number one issue. Well, what can we do to stop that? And tourniquets have been that answer. And for me, yeah, it is very important. Obviously, I'm probably biased, right? Because I've done a lot of this training before, and I've used tourniquets, and thankfully been fortunate enough to kind of help out some people by applying a tourniquet. And so for me, I carry it with me kind of wherever I go. But a lot of people think that a tourniquet, may only be used for if someone, loses a limb or if they've been shot, and that's not the case at all. A tourniquet is used for any sort of life-threatening bleeding and or some questionable life-threatening bleeding. For instance, I think the one I told y'all was I was driving home from work or driving to work. I don't know. But there was a car wreck in front of me, and a guy had like cut his arm, like right on his forearm, and he had an arterial bleed. Thankfully I had a tourniquet on me, and I was able to apply the tourniquet and stop that life-threatening bleed. I mean, is it lucky? Could you say that? For sure, but I mean, also being prepared, also can play a factor. I always have one with me. Part of what, people say that you have an EDC, which is like your everyday carry, so like, every day I always carry my phone, my wallet, my car keys, whatever, or a pocket knife, And so for me, like I have a small little tourniquet that I carry with me, one because I'm a medical guy, and so I always want to have a little bit of something to kind of help out myself, family, or friends. Or if I get into a situation like that again, if someone less fortunate is in a wreck, if I can do something to potentially help save them, or at least kind of stall that to get them to, some better medical care, then of course I'll take it with me. But tourniquets are great, and there's a lot of research just supporting just the massive benefit that they have.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I had no idea the wide spectrum application of them. Just from what I've learned, it's typically, like you had said, like emergency situations, but I guess what most people hear, like you said, are like gunshots and things like that, but I never considered car crashes. So I just wanted to take a step back, and you had said that, probably 85% of the calls you get as a paramedic are not life-threatening, but what about that 15%? I was curious, that 15%, you're in those situations and it's often life-threatening. And I'm sure you've seen some crazy things. Maybe Jada will ask you, or maybe Jada knows, some of the craziest or most exciting cases you've seen, which from a purely medical standpoint, I'm sure are extremely interesting. But we have to remember that these medical professionals, you guys are humans too. How does someone in your field, or how do you specifically manage your mental health? Like, I'm sure it's hard to see these things at times, and how do you stay in your career for the long run?
No, that's actually that's super big for me, actually, especially like right now. It's very tough. So I've been in EMS now for, I don't know, like 12 years now, give or take 12, 13 years. And it's very tough. And like PTSD and depression are really big for me, just because, I mean, I've battled through them, obviously. And I think what people kind of, I guess, skip over is the fact of just how it comes on. A lot of people think that um, it's going to be these most super devastating calls that are going to, you know, provide the most problems, and that's not always the case. You know, a call that might make me sensitive may not be a problem for you, but a call that might, cause you to get into your head, might be nothing for me. Everybody, whether you know it or not, has something that's going to grip you, right? Because at the end of the day, we're humans, right? We have emotions. No matter how calloused you think you are, at the end of the day, right, there's going to be something that pulls at your heartstrings. For me, right, I got an army of children out there. I've got like 4 of them, and they keep growing and multiplying. But so kids, right? That's a very sensitive area for me. But also, it doesn't even have to be that. It could be something as simple as like a cross on a highway, right? So I personally try not to work where I live, just because I don't want those kind of daily reminders. I've done that before. I've worked on friends before that have called. Uh, I've worked on family, and I, obviously don't want to do that. So I try to go away from all that. But, I mean, there's times where I'm driving down the road and, I'll see crosses on the side of the road from maybe a car wreck that I had worked, and so, so when I see that, for a brief moment, like I remember, and so I think and I dwell on that. But I think for me personally, I think every time you see, something bad, or maybe you've seen someone who's died, whether it be traumatic or not, I think every time you see that, I think it takes slowly takes a piece of you, whether it's really big or really small. But eventually it starts to pile up. And with our profession, being a first responder, suicide rates are climbing really high. And you would think that, having a group of people dealing with the same calls that you do on an everyday, that there would be a very tight knit group that you can talk and vent. And unfortunately, people don't feel that way. People like to hold it inside because they feel like if they express that they're sad or that they're depressed, they fear that their peers are going to look down on them, or they fear that if I tell my job that, man, I'm really struggling, or I'm having these bad thoughts or these nightmares, that I'm going to lose my job. They're going to think I'm not mentally fit. One, that's obviously not the case at all. For me personally, I've reached out to people because I've had hard times before. I've been on some really bad calls, and I've reached out to talk to people, and it's made a difference for sure. There's in the Army, I learned, you always hear the thing, embrace the suck, got to keep pushing on, but there's nothing like embracing the suck with your friends, and just like, if you have family, right? If you have brothers or sisters or whoever, right? If someone is, handling a burden, right? Your family, your friends, they come help take that burden with you. And that's been good. Obviously, for me personally, I've talked to therapists, because I have, PTSD or whatever. And with that, the therapists, they, for me, they didn't really help out that much. And obviously not lack on them at all. They do a great job, but, just people are different. So for me, talking about, the traumas that I've been exposed to didn't really help me out too much, just because for me, my problem was it wasn't like I did anything wrong. If I came across something tragic, I didn't do a grave mistake to where I needed to, get these things out. My problem was, I have these images in my head, and they're attached to things like smell or how I feel, right? Whether, oh, is it cold air outside? Oh, can I smell, the gas on the road from a car wreck, or, whatever, So once it's attached to different sorts of senses, it gets rooted deeper and deeper into you. So for me, what helps obviously is having a really good support system at home. My wife is very supportive, and she's very big on mental health, and that has been huge. So what helps for me is coming home and having a really good support system, being able to use my energy in a productive way, whether it be going to the gym or, doing yard work, or, doing something productive definitely helps out. When people get in these bouts of depression, all they want to do is you just want to sit in bed, and you don't want to move. You don't want to do anything. And if you're ever talking to a psychiatrist or a doctor and they're trying to evaluate how depressed are you, that's one of the things they ask is, do you lay in bed all day? Do you sleep more than 12 hours? Do you even go outside? Do you talk to anybody? So the first thing you got to do is you got to get out of bed, and you got to start slowly moving and working. And so that helps out a lot, obviously. There's a whole host of other treatment options. There's ketamine infusions. I have done those, and I've seen the most success with that personally. But with mental health, it is a very new focus recently on just EMS and first responders in general. And I think that, or I'm glad that there's awareness, and I'm glad that there's momentum in identifying that. Obviously, I think that there still needs to be more work done, but obviously, it's kind of early onset, right? Years and years, people had pushed mental health down as, if you have mental health problems, or if you're struggling with, depression or PTSD, then you're just a crazy guy or something, and obviously that's far from the case. And the world is now finally seeing that, and I think now taking some very key actions into helping out in that realm for sure.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned earlier that a lot of people keep what they've experienced to themselves, and they don't want to tell people at work or their friends or their family just because they feel like it makes them feel weaker, or that they're not as strong as they should be for someone who works in that field. And I think it's really important that you focus on how that's not necessarily the case, and that sometimes you have to reach out to those people and you have to kind of work together, like teamwork,
Yeah.
to get through everything. And of course, mental health is such a big deal, and we've only just started asking this question. I guess just like everyone else, we've kind of forgotten to ask it, and now we're trying to bring it in to see, what are some of the things that medical professionals do to deal with what they see every day.
Right.
And speaking of what you see every day, I mean, I've been on the ambulance and I've seen some of the more common cases, and I know that a lot of what you guys get is just like fevers, or they just need to be taken to the hospital. But since you've seen so many interesting cases, we were wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about what some of your more interesting cases do look like.
Let's see. I mean, it's hard to answer on the spot. So like, because each person and each individual can stick out for so many different reasons. I mean, you could have a severe schizophrenic patient who could say just crazy bizarre things, and that'll obviously make them stick out. Or you could have a very traumatic call that'll stick out, or you could have people will always stick out for different things. But I mean, for me, I think what sticks out, I guess, from just abrupt thinking is probably the first person I saw that was in cardiac arrest. And I think I even told y'all's group, like, if you're going to somebody in cardiac arrest, to really, before you go in there, stop and evaluate your mind and if you think you would be able to handle it. Just because for me in that, right, I can remember every little detail about that call, right? I remember, it was a COPD guy. He had lung cancer, throat cancer, stage 4. He had all sorts of radiation treatment done and chemo done, so his airway was all scarred up or whatever. But I remember, he had fallen, and there were these rocks, and he had cut the back of his head, and so they were white rocks, and they were like just they were covered in blood, and it had clotted up at this point while we were working on him. And I remember we had struggled to get an airway just because of how scarred his airway was. It made it very, very narrow. And so, with that, we had to cut his throat and put a tube down his throat, through a trach, versus, intubating the patient like we normally would. And also, I mean, that stands out too, because it's not every day that you perform a surgical crike on somebody. It's a very rare skill. I think in my total 12 years of EMS, I've personally cut one person. I've been a part of 2 others, so 3 in my whole career. So those stick out for sure. I think, a big humbling moment. I'll tell you a big humbling moment that made me really take a step back. In your career in EMS, you always hear, this person is a paragod or whatever. They think that they can cure cancer and they know everything about, life and whatever. And I was not there yet, thankfully. But I was getting newfound confidence, and which confidence can be really good or obviously really bad, right? You find that you got to walk that line of, am I cocky, or am I humble with what I know and willing to share? And I was young, and we were on a really busy truck, and we had got a late call. We did this late call. We're driving back from a late call, and normally if you have late call we're not allowed to stay over 2 hours past our shift. So even, our shift ends at 7 a.m. So if it's 9:01 and there's a really, really bad call, our policy says it doesn't matter. Like, you need to go home because you need obviously to rest, recuperate, whatever. So we had got a late call and we're driving back to our station, and it's probably like 8:57, like we're like 2-3 minutes away, and then there was a call that drops. It was a car wreck. And so we're like, oh, okay, so we'll go do this. Then it upgrades to an entrapment, and it's like 2 streets over from where I'm at. So we're obviously going to be the first unit in. And so we get there. We're the first ones there. Fire department's not there, whatever. And these 2 vehicles went head on. And so they went head on, and one vehicle went 50 yards one way and the other one went 50 yards the other way. So we got about a 100-yard gap between us. And it was me and my partner. And I was not an in charge yet. I was still just a first level paramedic, I guess. So my in charge goes, hey, I'm going to take a bag and I'm going to go to this vehicle. It looks, more severe. You go get your bag and you're going to go to this other vehicle. It doesn't look so severe. So I was like, okay. So I go to my vehicle, and, this lady was not doing good at all. We get there. She's very disoriented, very out of it. She's not answering any of my questions. She's not doing anything. She's just looking around very ominously. And I looked down, and she had broken both of her arms, and she had compound fractures, so bones were out, and they were kind of resting on a steering wheel, and then like her head was kind of obviously had some fractures there, and she was not doing very well. My partner at the time and our radios couldn't get out, so I couldn't tell my partner that, hey, I needed help. I couldn't call for any other resources. I knew other ambulances were coming, but at the time, right, I had no one there but me. And you're just looking at this patient, and there's 100 things that need to happen, right, in this split second, right? I need to control the bleeding from her arms, right? I need to ventilate for this patient, because right now, like, she's not ventilating effectively on her own due to the massive skull fractures that she had that were pushing on her brain, causing her to have an erratic breathing pattern. Also, she was trapped in the vehicle, so I couldn't get her out even if I wanted to start potentially working on her. Another factor in all these calls is that kind of gets overlooked is our crowds, so other people had stopped. So I've got, like 5 people behind me, like, what are you doing? Why are you just standing there? Why aren't you helping her? Like, what do you got to, and for me, as like, what, 22-year-old kid or something, like, it's hard to keep your focus on this and explain to these, these civilians, right, who obviously they just want the best for the patient, just like you do, right? But I can't get this lady out. The door had literally like almost like welded to her. I mean, just crushed into her, and she was forming. I couldn't open it. We couldn't open the door, get to this lady, and just presenting with so many problems, right? Like, how do you effectively manage, essentially what comes out is like a train wreck initially, and so you really have to take a step back, take a breather, and just go back to your training and your muscle memory and your focus on, okay, well, I need to stop her bleeding first, because that's what's going to take her life the fastest. And then I need to do this, utilizing my resources too on scene. I had one of the civilians kind of hold her neck to help, maintain her C-spine. Also, with the position that we had her in, it could also help open up her airway so that, it could stay open and patent enough until I got other providers there. Eventually, they came and the call played out. But for me, that was humbling, just because at that point, I never had anybody who was really had multiple problems going on at the same time. And it was a really big ego check at that time of, hey, like, you don't know everything like you think you may, right? Or you may not be as good as this job as you think you are. And I think that needs to happen for any provider who is going to eventually become a leader and to have any sort of influence. And for me, like, that was a really big day, really big humility dose. And thankfully, I haven't had any big ego checks like that again, but it really kind of put me in my place. And I think with that, being able to set aside that ego and to, realize, like, you don't know everything like you think you do. Always stay, always have that mindset of being teachable, always being able to learn new techniques, always being able to refresh what you think you may know. Part of my job right now, as a captain, is I train new employees, as well as I help evaluate paramedics who are wanting to become an in-charge and operate on their own ambulance. So one of the first things I'll do is I'll pull them into the ambulance and I'll ask them, like, what do you need to work on? And the people who are like, oh, I know it all, for me, I'm like, you're lying to yourself. There's something that you can always work on to improve. Or, if there's an area that they do need improvement on, we'll focus that. But after I get that talk out of the way, then we'll go over medications. And there's small, medications, small little things that they may do that I think a lot of people, forego and will miss because they think they know everything about the medicine. And the instance I would use was we used to carry this medicine called calcium gluconate. And we would use it for, many things, if they were hyperkalemic, or they had a lot of potassium, or, if they had overdosed on whatever various medications, we would typically give it for that. But one of the things that this medicine would do was that it would help treat muscle spasms and a black widow spider bite. And no one would know that, and I think personally that it's because they think that they know a lot about the medication, so they don't ever have to go back and review and stay studied up. And so that was always my big kind of point for these people, that, hey, you may have read this medication for years and you may think you know it, but it's very important that you stay up to date on everything with it, so that you can be the best provider that you can be and make a difference in somebody's life. But I mean, people stand out for all kinds of different reasons. So I guess those are probably my two biggest things I can think of right now off the top of my head.
Yeah, wow, that was a lot to take in, and I think when Jada said most interesting case, I think as you explained these cases, I realized that medically interesting is not always equivalent to, interesting as in like something you would want to take in. It sounds like you learned a lot from it. Clearly, you had an ego check in that high intensity situation. Yeah, so I thought that was really cool. So just for our final question before we wrap up our interview, we just like to ask our our interviewees, what is a very typical, like, Tuesday afternoon, not a Tuesday afternoon, of course. What's a typical day in the life like? Because it sounds like you're very, involved in the community and teaching others, but what does that sum up to for you?
So for me, obviously I work with my partner. I work with him every day. With that, I'm based out of a fire station, so I have a group of fire guys that we also work with. So I'll get to work every morning about 6:45. Our shift starts at 7. We do 24-hour shifts, so from 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. So once we get to work, the first thing that we do is we check off the ambulance. We make sure everything is there. So that way we can obviously start our day knowing that all of our drugs, all of our tools, all of our just equipment in general is in top working order and resupplied and stocked. So we'll go check off that. My partner will start, reviewing all of our medical bags. And as the in charge, my job responsibility is to maintain control of the narcotics. So that's our, big pain medicines or, benzos, all that. So me and the other in charge will get together and we will do the narcotic exchange. So I'll take the drugs from that person and I'll attribute them into my name. Once we had the ambulance done and checked off, we will then go and, wash the truck, clean the station, make sure everything is, in working order, looking nice and pristine. Because we're obviously, a public entity. So, we'll have public come by every now and then. Kids will want to see the fire trucks and the ambulances. Or, we'll have observers that want to come and stand by. And so being able to start off the day with the good step forward, can help set the pace for the day. Once we've done that and we've cleaned the station and we've done all of our chores that we have to do, the day is ours. So sometimes we'll immediately take a nap if we can. For me, I normally got to go check up on emails because I do a lot of teaching, outside of this job. Or outside of the ambulance side, I teach Stop the Bleed to school districts. I also, do training for law enforcement and stuff like that. So I'll check up on emails. If I have an in-charge candidate or if I have a new employee at this point, right, I'll start breaking down what we're going to learn today and the topics with that. Currently, right now, I don't have a new hire or an in-charge candidate, but my partner is wanting to get his in charge. And so from here, we'll go over some higher level material in preparation for him to get his in charge. From there, we'll normally go get some breakfast, hang out with the fire guys. Lately, we've been playing a lot of pickleball, if you know what that is. Yeah. So we've been playing some pickleball, killing some time. But for me, at my station, we fortunately don't get a lot of downtime. We're normally pretty busy. We do on average like 16 calls a day. And so I'm normally gone for about 90% of my day. Just once we get back from the station, I'll restock the ambulance and then we'll go back out on another call most likely. But EMS, you do have like a lot of freedom with your day once you do all your duties. When I was at a slower station, I was going to college, so I was doing like online classes while I was at work. Some people will bring their PlayStations up and they'll play PlayStation all day, or they'll watch movies, and whatever you want to do. There's with this job, it's different than nursing or being a physician, right, where you have your set cases for the day, or you're stuck in an ER for 12 hours and you're constantly getting patients. We have a lot more freedom in that regard. And so if there's nothing to do, it's really whatever you want to do at that point. And EMS, kind of one of the things that drew me to it, I guess, is that there is no like typical Tuesday. Tuesday could be the worst day of the whole week, or, and you would think a Saturday night on a full moon, you think the world's going to fall apart, and, you get absolutely nothing that day. It's no day is, ever the same. And that obviously keeps, interest high and things like that in the job.
Yeah, I can definitely say I've experienced the fast-paced days and then definitely the slower-paced days, where we really don't have much at all going on. But thank you so much for sharing your story with us and explaining a little more about what paramedics do, and more specifically what you do. You hit a lot of really important points, including the mental health and also the importance of educating the community and other people that work with you. And I think that Emma and I have both learned a lot from your experiences, and we hope that our listeners will have that same feeling as well. So we just want to say thank you again.
Yeah, anytime.
Thank you.
Anytime. Of course.
I can say myself, I just finished an internship at a cardiologist's office, and it's the same things that you said drew you in to being a paramedic are the same things that, or I guess the opposite, that we experience. And he's mostly in the clinic. Yeah. I'll go to the hospital a couple different hospitals and watch procedures. But, the same way that you just said that being kept on your toes and like never knowing what to expect is almost the opposite. And I could see the beauty in both. With your job, you're always interested. You never know what's going to come next. But at the same time, like if you do know to expect 20 patients with hypertension, one patient that needs an angiogram, one patient that needs a loop recorder implant, and like I guess that takes some of the stress away from the job. But it's been really interesting to see both sides of it. So I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
For
Thanks
sure.
again.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime. Awesome. Y'all have a good one.
You too.
You too. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Stories Behind the Scrubs. If you haven't already listened to the last episode with Dr. Casey Patrick, set aside some time to check that out. If you look forward to hearing our next podcast episode, click the subscribe button and be sure to follow our Instagram at Stories Behind the Scrubs and check out some of our other episodes.